want to just introduce ourselves as the MC and talk a little bit about how we're tied in with this program. So my name is Christine Alozie, or as my people would say, Christine Alozie. I am a student here and I work for the Department of Residence Life and Housing. I've always been passionate about student leadership and diversity, and one of the things that sparked that interest in me is the story of my parents. Both of my parents were two international students from Nigeria who happened to meet each other at college here in the United States in the Deep South in the late 70s and 80s. And as you all could imagine, two African students in college in the Deep South around that time would make for many interesting experiences, but it also made for many learning experiences which they passed on to my siblings and I. And this has ignited a passion within me to stay close to my African heritage. And as a student leader here on campus, I make sure that I interact with the African students and interact with the international students on the whole. So I'm just so proud and excited to be here tonight, and I'm excited to guide you guys through this program as we go along.
Hi, and I'd like to introduce myself as Michael Mensah. I'm a student here at Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, and I am an active member of the African Student Association. Now, first of all, just like Christine said, I'm very excited to be here because this is our very first African cultural event, and I really look forward to seeing some great shows, great performance tonight, just like I hope all of you are getting ready to see something wonderful tonight. Now, first of all, I just wanted to let you all know that the group performing tonight will put on some of the most spectacular performances that you'll ever see anywhere else. And it's basically a chance for us to show the American community, specifically the Edinburgh community here, a portion of African taste. So I really hope that you guys will enjoy the show.
So our first portion of the night will be two brief presentations by two of Edinburgh University's very own.
Okay, so it's my pleasure to announce the first speaker. He's a professor at the Edinburgh University Department of History and Anthropology, and he's here to talk on the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Umeme Sababu.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words tonight about Nelson Mandela. And I believe that in order for me to actually do this, we'll have to talk a little bit about South Africa as well. First of all, I give thanks to the African Student Union for inviting me to put on this great program. I think it's needed in Edinburgh as well as the large area community. As many of you may know, the world is much smaller than we have been led to believe. We are a global community. We need to learn about other people's culture in order to succeed in our future lives. So again, thank you for the African Student Union and the International Student Union as well, okay? The title of my talk is From Prison to the Palace, and it's the life of Nelson Mandela and South Africa. Some of you may not know, you may be too young to remember that from 1948 to 1994, apartheid was made law in South Africa by the new ruling Afrikaner Nationalist Party. The Afrikaners are the descendants of the Dutch who traveled to South Africa in the 17th century and landed in Cape Town. By 1948, they become the ruling party in South Africa. The party enacted mass racial legislation to maintain a system of white supremacy and domination of the black majority. Just imagine a country of 4 million people dominated and controlled 37 million people. A country of 4 million Afrikaans and English-speaking people who dominated a country of 37 million people. They devised a system that divided and segregated people into categories of white, black, colored, and Indian. It is within this context that we examine the life and story of Nelson Mandela, Nelson Ralihlahla Mandela, which means actually pulling the branch of the tree, or more colloquially means troublemaker. In 1994, I visited South Africa, arriving in Johannesburg on March 20th. After arriving in Johannesburg, I took a connecting flight to Orange Free State, which I found out later was the seat and the inner city of Afrikaner nationalism. I landed in a place called Bloemfontein. Little did I know that I was in the heart of Afrikaner nationalism. After meeting my guide, I showered, slept a few hours, and took the train back to Johannesburg, and then was driven to Sharpeville to participate in the remembrance of the Sharpeville massacre, which was a police riot that led to 67 women and children and men being shot in the back while running away from the repressive state apparatus of the apartheid state. Welcome to South Africa. Nelson Mandela, born July 18, 1918, in the Transkei, was one of 13 children. His father had been a renowned chief and was exposed to a family of great pride. He was the first in his family to attend the school, and it was there he received the name of Nelson. It is also vital important to know that Nelson learned of leadership while sitting under the tree listening to the elders speak about leadership qualities. You know, you don't need a school building to learn. There are many cultures in this world that don't have schools, but yet they have learning, sitting under a tree learning from his elders. It was while attending Fort Hare University that he met one of the leaders of the ANC, Oliver Tambo, and learned about the organization's long struggle to dismantle the system of domination in South Africa. However, it was not until he traveled to Johannesburg in 1939, partly to escape an arranged marriage of his people. He learned of the oppression of his people and the inhumane treatment. While working in the gold mines, he was a watchman, and he saw the indignity and the inhumane treatment of the working class in the gold and diamond mines of South Africa. You know, imagine a country that is rich in gold and diamonds. The same gold and diamonds that you and I purchase and look at, but a nation that is in poverty to this very day. He also met another longtime activist, Walter Sisulu, and was warned not to associate with him because he might wind up in prison. Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Oliver Tambo and Ashley Madala were elected to the executive committee of the newly established ANC Youth League. In 1952, along with his companion Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela opened the first black law firm in Johannesburg. The great majority of his cases dealt with the abusive and obtrusive past laws. Past laws were designed to control the movement of Africans under apartheid. These laws evolved from regulations imposed by the Dutch and British in the 18th and 19th century. It was past laws that built a slave economy of the Cape Colony. In the 19th century, new past laws were enacted for the purpose of ensuring a reliable supply of cheap, docile African labor for the gold and diamond mines. In 1952, the nationalist government enacted a more rigid law that required African males over the age of 16 to carry a reference book. You know, it reminds me of slavery in the United States, when enslaved Africans could not move without having a pass. It reminds me of the end of slavery, the Jim Crow period from 1865 to 1954, when in fact African Americans could not be seen without having a pass, even though slavery was over. It was slavery with a new name. This led to the Defiance Campaign in 1952, the massive women's protest in Pretoria in 1956, and the burning of passes at the police station in Sharpeville, which led to the Sharpeville massacre of 1960. Although Nelson had been arrested in 1956 and went to trial for treason, he was acquitted in 1961, but he was now a marked man. In fact, in 1961, Nelson began to rethink the ideal of peaceful protest, which had resulted in the tightening of the system of apartheid. Although there were some who were against the ideal, Nelson eventually won over the comrades that he needed to have armed struggle. It's interesting that when the oppressed take up arms, that they are called violent, but the violence was in the system of control that apartheid represented. Nelson began to rethink the idea of peaceful protest. And he also was influenced by the successful revolution in Cuba in 1959. Although there was some against the ideal, they went to armed struggle. While hiding in the home of Wolf Kodesh, he read the book titled The Principles of War, and later founded the military wing of the African National Congress called the Umkhonto we Sizwe. It was in response to the savage attacks of the apartheid state. Initially, it was directed at military and industrial targets of the state regime. He stated it was not designed to win the war. Clearly, he understood that the state apparatus of apartheid was too powerful to defeat with its cache of weapons, helicopters, planes, arms, and its stash of biological weapons designed to kill, maim, and sterilize the black population. We only now know the fact that the apartheid state had these mass biological weapons. And we do think that, in fact, that they were aided by other regimes, other nations, in building their particular weapons. He also insisted, for those who thought, that it was not terrorism. That terrorism was designed to target individual organizations, the state, innocent people at all costs. But the military campaign of the ANC was to sabotage the instruments of oppression, the apparatus of oppression. So Nelson also saw armed struggle as a key way of ensuring that not only the nation, but the world knew the apartheid state and its violence. He recognized that the ground forces were different than Cuba, yet it was an example of successful armed struggle. Finally, captured on a raid while traveling from Durban to Johannesburg, he was arrested and tried and convicted of treason. He stated the trial was a farce and used the trial to state the position of the ANC. Later, he was brought back to trial after his comrades, Walter Sisulu and others, had been captured and faced the death sentence or prison. To the dismay of many white South Africans, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and 7 others were given a life sentence. Nelson's words were indicative of his legendary stance. He stated, "The ideal of a democratic and free society is an ideal for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs to be, it is an ideal which I am prepared to die for." After the trial, he and his comrades were whisked Robben Island for years. The authorities thought they would be forgotten. But they were painfully mistaken. The struggle continued in prison and in South Africa. One of the prison guards stated that while in prison, Nelson Mandela told his comrades to take a stand, and to work as slow as possible. The guard talked about Nelson Mandela's stance. He said that while Nelson Mandela was working in the line, cracking lines, and he would take a pick, and that it would take him 10 minutes to pick up. He would take 10 minutes. He said, "Oh my God, this black guy is not going to work." Even in prison, he they still were struggling against the oppressive regime. The guard went on to say that while working in the line field, Nelson would organize the prisoners that they would follow every word that he said. Obviously, let's not think for a minute that it was not a painful experience to be separated from one's family and wife with the possibility of never seeing the country or his family again. Nelson recognized that South African forces had been experts in persecuting people psychologically. Yet the struggle intensified as more youth began to take more drastic and violent measures, and the emergence of Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness Movement. Unfortunately, I don't have much time to go into Steve Biko, but for those of you who are very much interested in the history of South Africa, you need to look at and examine Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness Movement, which dealt with the psychological aspect of black oppression and how to deal with the psychological aspect of oppression itself. No assessment of Nelson Mandela can be left without mentioning the passionate woman who may be regarded as a legend in her own right, despite the troubles that she has faced in her later life, Winnie Mandela. According to Nelson Mandela, she was the pillar of the struggle and made a massive contribution to the ongoing struggle against apartheid. Her imprisonment, ban, and harassment was and is also a story to be told. Nelson stated that after 1976, the strategy was changed. It was to make South Africa ungovernable. The struggle became an international worldwide struggle to boycott and isolate South Africa, Nelson Mandela, instead of being forgotten by the face of South Africa, all around the world he became the face of Free South Africa and the Free Nelson Mandela campaign. It was strengthened and protested some of the major industrial nations in the world emerged, particularly the United States. The constructive engagement campaign under President Ronald Reagan and Assistant Secretary of State Chester Crocker crumpled under the international glare of South Africa's inhumane treatment of its population. Here stood in the late part of the 20th century the last bastion of outright white supremacy. The final straw was President P.W. Botha's statement that, quote-unquote, I am prepared, the President of South Africa at that time, P.W. Botha, who said, I am prepared to release Mr. Mandela if he would say that he rejects violence as a means to reach and achieve political end. To which Mandela responded through his daughter, Zinzi, I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free. Your freedom and mine are not to be separated. I will return. This is a guy in prison, serving a life sentence. The possibility of being free from Robben Island, who is saying that you and I, my people, are not free, and that I will not be separated from my people, and is stating clearly that he sees the day when he will be free. This is the character, the integrity of a true revolutionary freedom fighter in the 20th century. A man who puts the people's life above and beyond his own life, despite the fact he had not seen his daughter for almost 14 years. He could see his wife only once every 6 months, but yet he is putting the life of his people above the life of his own. Increasingly isolated, it was now a matter of time before, and the end seemed near. A benefit to free Nelson Mandela was held in England that was streamlined to 60 countries, exhibited a massive truth that the force of history and the struggle of massive people was at a crossroad. The next president, F.W. de Klerk, came into the presidency clearly understanding that the tide had changed in history, and more importantly, that Nelson Mandela held the key to saving South Africa. Here the president of the nation negotiating with a man in prison on the future of South Africa. The year of 1990, the month of February, the 11th day, the world witnessed one of the most amazing stories of the 20th century, maybe the most amazing story in world history, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, strolling down the aisle with his wife in hand, for a nation of millions and a world of more millions seeing a massive change in South Africa's history. In 1994, Nelson Mandela spent 27, in 1994, Nelson Mandela was elected president of South Africa. He spent 27 years in prison for unjust crimes in an unjust state made by an unjust judge. There's more to the story. Chris Hani, who was probably the most significant leader next to Nelson Mandela, was assassinated after Mandela's release by an extremist in South Africa. South Africa was at the verge of turning into a more extreme violent way. Nelson Mandela spoke to the people about not having any regrets. Secondly, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had been established by Nelson Mandela and Bishop Tutu. I was with a family in South Africa looking and listening to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And one night we were looking at television, and one person told a story about how the state, two Afrikaners, had kidnapped this African, took him out to a woods, forest, barbecued him. They sat there while this man was being barbecued. They said that once they finished, that the bones still remained, so they had to continue to burn the bones. This was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people who had committed crimes could tell what they had done, and then they would not face any imprisonment. Obviously, I have a grave problem with that. It's never happened in the world. The Nazis were tried and convicted in the Nuremberg trials. It was unprecedented, an unprecedented act in humanity. An unprecedented act. Another story that was told. And all of us were crying with tears coming down our eyes, where this woman had been kidnapped, she had been undressed, and they took her to this home, and they undressed her naked. They said, took her breast and put it in a drawer and slammed the drawer on her nipples. These were the type of stories, the viciousness, the inhumane cruelty that these people face. But yet and still, the level of humanity is unheard of. Riding through Johannesburg and Soweto, visiting individuals' homes where they lived in tent shacks with newspaper as wallpaper, where it rains inside of them. And as I was visiting these places, I thought that my tour guide knew these people. I thought he knew these people. But he told me at the end of my guide that he didn't even know them. But yet they allowed me to come in to see how they were living. Nelson Mandela and the story of South Africa must never be forgotten. Some of the many comments I read, and one stands out, just almost brings me to tears even today. The character and integrity of this man is unquestionable. Let's not forget that although he has shown no outward expression of bitterness, you know, deep down inside, there is obvious bitterness that we will never know. In conclusion, although the Nationalist Party in South Africa thought that Nelson Mandela would be forgotten, they were wrongly mistaken and did not understand that truth crushed to the earth will rise again. That in the end, justice and goodness will prevail in the moral universe. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you, Dr. Umeme Sababu, for a very informative, very educational talk on the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. Thank you once again. Okay, so next we have Dr. Ray Wilson of the philosophy department to speak on which is going to be my favorite personally, the misconceptions of Africa. So without much ado, let's welcome Dr. Wilson to the podium.
Hello, good evening. First, let me thank the African students for bringing us here together tonight. I want to thank particularly the Student Government Association. Lights are very bright, so bear with me, for their support of the African students. Many years ago, we brought a group here from New York. The university was kind to support it. This time, it was the student government that was kind enough to hear our call and our cry to put this event together. So I want to thank the student government for this very generous offer. Okay? I happen to be the advisor of the African students group on this campus. I was the founding advisor in 1995 when we began. I've been the advisor since. I practically know every African student who's been to this campus, who's earned a degree here, and who's gone back to Africa, or who's gone back to grad school to further their life. And I'm thankful to Leo and the other African students who are here who made this night possible. We have students from all parts of Africa: Sudan, Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, you name it, Liberia. Did I leave anybody out? Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe. Can I go on? If I missed your country, that's okay. What I really want to talk about, in a few minutes, the students wanted me to talk about misconceptions people have about Africa. Africa has a long history. And that long history means there are a variety of heritages. In other words, this person has his heritage, I have my heritage, you have your heritage. From east to west, from Cape to Cairo, we have these different backgrounds. So Africa is not monolithic. People hear the word Africa and they think you know everything about Africa. Are you from Africa? Yeah. My God, have you been to Zimbabwe? No. How come? Well, I'm from West Africa. Between West Africa and Zimbabwe is almost 2 continents. Africa is 3 times the size of the United States. So it's practically difficult to traverse the entire continent. So many of the students you see here will never see the entire continent. To make matters worse, the place is still developing. People will say it's underdeveloped. My term is still developing. Because once you use the word underdeveloped, you generate another misconception that it is still rural, all rural, that it is still backwards, all backwards, that it's all villages, all villages. But there's a little bit more to the villages and the rural areas that most of the students here can talk about. Most of them are from city areas, they're from urban areas. They're from cities bigger and prettier than Erie, trust me. Erie will never look like Abidjan in the next 500 years. But when people in Erie ask, where are you from? And the kid says, I'm from Abidjan, they think he's from a village. No, Abidjan is a huge city. It's a big city. It's a pretty place. In fact, the people who live there call it Petit Paris, Little Paris, because it's so pretty. Not many cities in this United States can compare to the beautifulness or the beauty of Abidjan. I've been there and I know. Pittsburgh is a little smaller than Abidjan. Pittsburgh will be one part of Abidjan. I'm describing the misconceptions. Just so you know that there are big cities in Africa. You see, take Accra, with close to 6 million people in one city. Ghana has close to 30 million people in the capital, Accra. Accra, you drive across Accra in 2 hours. It's a huge city. Well, you say, well, that's the suburb. Look, but the suburb, all of it is Accra. And then you go to Lagos, or you go to Kampala, or you go to Bujumbura. All these huge cities you hear about in West Africa, in East Africa, in Central Africa, not to mention what Professor Sababu was talking about in South Africa itself. These are metropolitan areas. They are not all villages. But that's not my favorite part of Africa. My favorite part of Africa are the villages, where the people meet the earth, where the people live by the earth, where the people depend on the earth to make a living, to survive, to raise children, to raise family, and to be truly human. He was talking, Professor Sababu was talking about Nelson Mandela, that he came from prison without any hurt, without any anger, without any, what's the word, towards his oppressors, his captors. It is in those villages where that spirit, that attitude is nurtured. We learn very early in life that taking is not always better than giving. We learn very early in life that receiving is not always better than doing or giving. So we learn to give. even if it is mercy, if it is compassion, if it is love, and we pass that on to our children. That's what we do. And I say it's the best part of my life, because the village, because this is where I drank my first cup of water. I went to the creek and I got some water. This is the actual water God made. It flowed from some hill somewhere and it flowed down into the creek, and I came there and I got water, real water. Imagine finding water in the village. When people in the north, we heard stories where they couldn't find water because they live in the desert. This is the complexity of Africa. We have places where you have plains and mountains, and then you have a big old desert in the north or in the south. And then you have this huge forest, which is in the center of the continent, where you can see anything, find anything, have anything. And you go to those forests, then you find Europeans in the forest. And you say, why are they here? They're looking for gold. They're looking for diamond. They're looking for other things. They're looking for wealth to build Europe. To build Europe. We didn't see progress the way Europeans saw it. We saw our resources as belonging to us, as belonging to our children. We're going to pass it on to our children. Imagine seeing a European in the forest. In my language, there's a word for a white man. I'm not going to share that word tonight. You have to call me and I'll give it to you. It's not a bad word. It's a good word. We saw the white man as a good person. He only disappointed us. He didn't live up to the standard we bestowed upon him. To this day, many of us are still disappointed. But Africa, if you want to know where these kids come from, the students who organized this thing tonight, where they come from, this thing is called an iPad. Is that a word? Yeah. If you have one of these, or if you have a laptop at home, a computer at home, there is something called YouTube. Go to YouTube and just type in the Africa they never show you. The Africa you never see on TV. Then you'll see what I mean. We have a vast heritage. From village to city to town to hamlet. We have a vast heritage. A history that goes way back to the time of Jesus. We welcome him first. We welcome him first. You talk to the people in Ethiopia, they'll tell you. We welcome him first. We saw the star first. We don't like to proselytize. It's a fancy word for preaching your religion to other people, forcing your religion on other people. We don't do that. So we avoided war. Then some people told us we had to do it. And as you force your ideas on other people, which we Africans don't like to do, and if they resist, what happens? War. And so today in the Congo, there's a war going on. Every night before I go to bed, I pray, save Congo. Because I know the feeling. I'm a Liberian. We had a long war for 16 years. Nearly 300,000 people died, mostly women and children. was here in grad school. I cried every night. I lost my mother to the war. I lost 2 brothers to the war. I lost my father to the war. 4 from one family. Imagine what other families went through. So we always try not to push our ideas on other people. Remember I told you about Europeans in the forest? The war in Congo is a war started by Europeans in the forest. They're pushing guns. They're selling guns to villagers to kill one another. To kill the parents, the families of the African students you see here, because they're looking for something from the forest. If you have a cell phone, remember the old cell phone? It used to get hot when you used it too long. Remember? If you're more than 30 years old, you know what I'm talking about. The cell phone used to get hot, so hot you couldn't use it. Today, they don't get hot. Why is that happening? Because we discovered something in the Congo. And now we can insert that thing into cell phones. It doesn't get hot anymore. They're fighting over it. There are few places in the world you can find it. You can find it in Russia, but the Russians won't sell it. They found it in the Congo. When the Congolese didn't want to sell it, they started a war. They divided the Congo. For about 28 years, the war has been going on. That's the Africa these children are from. Hey, I'm a placeholder right here. They're getting ready. And as soon as they're ready, I get a signal, and the show will begin. But what they're going to do tonight is another part of Africa. This is part of our heritage. We get up in the morning, we go to the farm, we work like hell. We come back home, the moon begins to shine, and guess what we do? We get our drums. Every boy had a drum in my village. I had several drums. And I would play them. My uncle was a drum maker. He made them for other people. And then we would drum all night. Between 8 o'clock and 1 o'clock, we would be drumming. We'll be playing. We'll be singing. We'll be dancing. The girls will be rocking. That was my favorite part. Have you ever seen an African woman rock? The day you visit Africa, go to the village. Don't go to the big cities, go to the village. And watch as they recreate at night. They will sing, they will play, and they will dance. The dance was the best part of it. Some people came and they were fascinated with the drums. Well, we're fascinated by the rhythm of the drum. It announces the past. It tells about the present. It speaks about the future. The drum is a symbol of Africa. We play the drum to tell our story. You pay attention, you listen closely to the drummer. He's telling a story. Every drummer tells a story. That's why when I hear about drums, I'm excited. See? In this country, the thing I'm most excited about are whoppers. When I hear about whoppers, I'm excited. But the doctor tells me they're not too good for me. But drums, I'll never forget them. They're always good for you. And I hope you will enjoy tonight. I want to thank you for coming. We're happy you're here. Trust me, the African students are grateful you came out tonight. Thank you very much.
you, Dr. Wilson. We are so lucky at Edinburgh University to have two important cultural resources right here. But as we all know, one of the finest resources used to further learning is the arts, the performing arts, that is. I hope you are all on the edge of your seats, because now's the part where you get to see an African woman rock. All the way from New York City, we have one of the world-renowned leaders in promoting West African dancing, percussion, and performance. We are so honored to bring to you guys Geneva. Woo!